My name is Phoebe Swina, and I'm from the pueblos of San Felipe and Cochiti, which are downstream communities from Capilene, the focus of our project today. Being from the pueblos, I'm part of a long line of farmers since time immemorial in this landscape. And 2 weeks ago, my family and I actually went to go irrigate our traditional crops of corn, squash, melons, and gourds. And the ditch rider, Dean, told us that we couldn't irrigate because of the lack of available water. Dean felt horrible telling me this because he knows the traditional crops that we're growing are essential for our Pueblo way of life. And then I felt horrible because I had to tell my young kids who have spent hours in the hot sun planting, loving, and caring for our traditional crops, that just because of the lack of available water, we might not be able to irrigate and might lose our crops. So this is what brings us back to this challenge. The availability of water is directly tied to the health and recovery of Capilene. And why is Capilene so important? Because Capilene watershed was devastated by multiple catastrophic wildfires, diminishing its ability to contribute and support the local community water resources. Capilene is not only essential to the water resources for all Middle Rio Grande communities, but also holds a sacred place in the Pueblo people's world because of the essential cultural resources on the landscape. And as Pueblo people, it is our sacred responsibility to steward all our landscapes, rivers, and resources for future generations. Our team today will share how this pitch helps us live up to our responsibility. Thank you. James?
Thanks, Phoebe. Hi, everyone. My name is James Calabasa. I'm from Santo Domingo, Pueblo, and I'm a National Program Director for Trees, Water, and People. I'm presenting our project, Catalyzing Watershed Scale Change and Preserving Puebloan Life Voice in the Middle Rio Grande Corridor. The Puebloan peoples have been the original stewards of the Middle Rio Grande for generations and carry thousands of years of data and cultural connection to the land. We, as the next generation of Indigenous stewards, have an acute understanding to the challenges and degradation affecting New Mexico's water sources. Our team's diversity is our strength. Guided by the deeply rooted connection to the Middle Rio Grande, shaped by ancestral pueblos, our team is leading a restoration effort that focuses on cultural resurgence and climate resilience. Over half of New Mexicans call the Middle Rio Grande home and depend on the health of the river for their livelihoods and connection to the land. Communities within this corridor understand that large urban centers like Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Rio Rancho depend and operate on critical natural resources from their surrounding landscape. Our project is going to work backwards from the tap to solve critical issues on water quality and quantity. We will be focusing on the upper watersheds of Capilene Canyon, a main tributary to the Rio Grande River and a cultural landmark for many Native American tribes. Capilene Canyon is within the jurisdiction of Santa Fe National Forest and is also within the ancestral homelands for many Puebloan communities. Since the turn of the century, Capilene Canyon has been impacted by 3 major wildfires, devastating over 70% of the canyon's watershed. It's been 10 years since the last major wildfire, and Capilene is seeing challenges to rehabilitate itself. Little to no regeneration is taking place, leading to a reduction in water infiltration, higher erosion, and heavier loads of sedimentation being carried downstream. Since Capilene Canyon is both on public lands and within the ancestral Puebloan homelands, it's what makes our project unique. It promotes Indigenous-led restorative efforts to take place, opening up doors for cross-jurisdictional projects, as well as instilling the concept of combining traditional ecological knowledge with the Western science-based approach. Our approach is going to focus on 3 goals. Our first goal is to invest in healthy watersheds. To invest in healthy, resilient watersheds, we are taking a top-to-bottom, headwaters to confluence approach by structuring it into 3 phases. Phase 1 is to reforest the upper watersheds with culturally relevant trees. Phase 2 is to implement in-stream structures to slow down the water. And then phase 3 is going to be based on adaptive management, monitoring how the watershed reacts to phases 1 and 2. Our second goal is to foster community climate resilience, having the active involvement and engagement from tribal communities and stakeholders, as well as promoting the intergenerational passage of knowledge from elders to youth. And then our third and last goal is to foster active collaboration and true partnership, leveraging resources, sharing information, as well as working collaboratively on projects as part of the cultural landscape. As such, all the stakeholders who are represented on this page are deeply supportive of our work in Capulin Canyon. This project goes beyond ecological impacts alone. It emphasizes the importance of traditional restorative practices as a form of cultural resurgence for the Pueblo peoples. This project also has the potential to serve as a valuable case study, allowing for future replicability of our model to be implemented into other fire-impacted canyons in the West. Just as people depend on the land depends on us, which is why our team is actively working with tribal communities and stakeholders to ensure community survival, the preservation of natural resources for our future generations, and to promote future thriving cities. For far too long, Indigenous voices have been excluded from decision-making around the preservation of our planet. It's now time to center their voices and deep knowledge as the original stewards of our lands.
Thank you, James. Pueblo people are the first engineers, hydrologists, and ecologists within this landscape. Our grandmas and grandpas have lived resiliently and stewarded these resources since time immemorial. Today, we have Indigenous young professionals like James that have higher degrees in hydrology and ecology and other STEM fields. We are blessed with our team because we have credible degrees in hand with thousands of years of expertise and knowledge passed down from our ancestors. This combination of Western education along with traditional and local knowledge and expertise makes this initiative and this team unique. As James shared, it is within our core values that we are instilled with to take care of our world, all communities and all people. And on our slide here, it is a picture of some of those young community members that we are thinking about as we work on and propose this project. This is actually a picture of my daughter Cuomots and my son Kukui learning how to take care of the land, live resiliently, and in balance with the environment. They've also been to Capulin and understand the importance and interdependence of this landscape to our entire community and our Pueblo way of life and our water resources. And I hope today we've conveyed some of that understanding and importance. Thank you for your consideration.
Thanks so much, Middle Rio Grande Group. Evaluators, please jump in.
Hi, I could go. Thank you so much. Sadhu here. Really interesting project, and I enjoyed reading about it. I'm not very familiar with the Pueblo kind of government structure and whatnot, so it's really interesting and some new areas for me to learn about. I guess I'm curious, James, you mentioned kind of the connection to thriving cities, and I guess I'm interested to hear a little bit more about the connectivity between your project and the area of the canyon that you're working and how it connects to the communities that you had mentioned in your proposal.
Yeah, totally. You know, this again, like this project definitely speaks volumes, you know, within this Middle Rio Grande corridor and the importance of how these small rural communities, you know, which are century old, you know, that predates the United States of America, you know, they have been the original stewards, you know, and understand that, you know, the large urban areas such as Albuquerque and Rio Rancho, you know, are pulling a lot of these resources and the water, you know, not just for human use, but for agriculture and for recreational as well. So these communities, you know, are usually left behind, not giving that opportunity to voice their decisions on what should take place instead, you know. So now what our project is doing is uplifting these indigenous voices as well as Hispanic voices within this corridor to know that, you know, they're in need of water too, you know, like as Phoebe mentioned in her story, you know, agriculture, irrigating their crops, is very vital to this region, because for a lot of families and a lot of independent farmers, is their main source of revenue coming in is their farm and their crops. So what one of our goals is, how can we connect that, again, that urban corridor to the rural communities and to the people, so that they can live, in an intersection where the preservation of water is is going to be needed moving forward, because New Mexico is seeing a huge kind of production in agriculture as well as commercial industry. So water is definitely going to be a critical concept, and currently already is. So our role in this is just to help lift those voices and convene the actors that can support projects to preserve the water resources.
I have a question. So thank you so much. It similarly was very educational, the proposal, like so many sort of details about your region. The project is incredibly ambitious, and I was curious about, maybe this relates a little bit to Sadu's question, sort of how can this amount of money help really move the needle for what looks like maybe a larger project? Would love to hear more, and or maybe this amount of money is actually the full cost. So yeah, I would love a little more elaboration on that.
Yeah, I can speak to that. My name is Emily Swartz, and I'm the GIS and watershed manager here at Trees, Water, and People. And yes, it is a very ambitious project, and certainly the Thriving Cities is not the full cost of the project. However, it's a valuable leveraging tool. And I think one of the amazing opportunities about Thriving Cities has been the opportunity to network and to connect with other funders. There's already a good amount of those partners that were represented are already invested and have potential funding sources. So it's going to be a mix of things. And part of the phased approach is really making it so it's in smaller pieces that are manageable. So it's a long-term project. It's not a project that's going to be done in a year or even 2 years, but rather is going to build on itself to be effective in the long term. So the opportunity is to continue looking for funding. We're also lucky that we have a lot of private donors. So there's a lot of options for how to fund it, and Thriving Cities is just one critical piece.
I'm not sure if the other evaluators have any questions. I had a follow on to that one.
You should go for it.
Okay, great. So just then can you elaborate a little bit more about that phasing? So how specifically could this money really inject, sort of catalyze the work towards that? And I know there's a lot of different stakeholders, and I know there's a lot of processes involved, but just like a little bit more specifics would be helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so our goal for phase 1 is really that uplands reforestation. And the approach there is that until the uplands are stabilized, it's hard to work in stream because that is still a really dynamic environment. So we want to get things slowed down higher up. It's also a really effective way to build connection with the communities, because we've been doing these tree planting projects on the surrounding tribal lands now for 3 years. So we've been doing that. So now it's expanding to federal lands that are within the ancestral homelands, which is what's so unique about this project, is that it is on the jurisdiction of the Santa Fe National Forest, but it's an Indigenous-led project. The idea came from the communities surrounding, and it's an essential project. And it's an essential project not only for those communities, but also for federal stakeholders. It's high on their priority list. So the phased approach will start with kind of the work we're already really, really good at, which is that reforestation piece. And that's what the Thriving Cities money it should completely cover that first phase. And then from there, we'll continue to develop, and working with Phoebe, who's the president and founder of High Watermark, is going to do a lot of that in-stream structure engineering for us. And we have a really diverse group of stakeholders who are extremely committed to this project. So between all of us, we're confident we can fund the entire thing.
Awesome, thank you.
In order to have a greater impact, I mean, I love the fact that you are doing upstream. I think that's fantastic. But in addition to doing upstream, are you doing some education downstream so that people also don't waste water, and so that people realize that they're not able to get enough water even for agriculture, because there is not enough on the river? So that you have a lot of impact upstream, but that also on the educational part with the boards of education down below, if there is some kind of complement to your project?
Yes, I think I can tackle that question. Thank you so much for that question. I think it's a combination of multiple ways of educating our community members. As I shared with some of my stories, is there's ongoing education in our Pueblo and indigenous communities of the unique interdependence of our landscapes like watersheds to how we use the water and the importance of the water. In addition to that, we've also continued to work with the local schools like Karis Children's Learning Center, which is Montessori-based education system there in one of the communities downstream of Capilene, as well as, again, engaging other communities such as Santo Domingo and other local Hispanic communities as well. So there's a lot of outreach going on, also because it is being led locally. So there's also that local grassroots community component that is really driving also the education of the entire community. Thank you.
Jalon, did you have a question?
Yeah. So no, thank you so much for the presentation. And I want to say I read somewhere about the importance of building up leadership. So not only are you making sure your voices are injected in the planning, but also really building up, like, you know, folks that can take leadership positions and get in decision-making positions. And I wanted to hear a little bit about that, because that to me gets to some of the structural and institutional racism that has existed, and why I think this project is so important.
I think I can take that as well. And thank you again so much for that question. And as we shared, this project is unique because of the indigenous leadership, that the approach that we're taking. And it's slow, but I think we've all seen a recognizable shift with the recognition of traditional expertise and knowledge that Pueblo people and indigenous people actually bring to the table in a variety of different areas. As I said in our presentation, we are the first engineers, we are the first ecologists and hydrologists and scientists, architects, you name it, in this landscape. And so really, I think in addition to that, one of the next steps is to actually begin to memorialize this concept and this recognition in policies and regulations and guidelines on various levels, like the federal, state, and local government levels, as well as with other local stakeholders. And I think there's been a slight shift in that. And also, I know it's a lot of on our shoulders with folks like James, Ariel, and others on our team, that it's hard for us because we have to, in a sense, blaze a trail. I hate to use that word, but and it's a lot more pressure, and we're having to really not only justify our traditional and expertise that our grandparents have provided to us, but make sure that it is integrated and incorporated in ongoing decisions. So I sure appreciate that question.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Phoebe and the Trees, Water, and People Middle Rio Grande team.